Hey guys, so I want to do installment number 3 of my deep dive into the Beatles US Capitol albums. And today we're going to be talking about something new. Now, this is actually the 5th American release of the Beatles material for the American market. You had Introducing the Beatles, which was released on the VJ label in late 1963. You had Meet the Beatles, which was released in February of 1964. You had Beatles' second album, which was April of 1964. You had the United Artists soundtrack to their first movie, A Hard Day's Night, which was released in July of 1964, and Capitol released Something New in July of 1964, July 20th to be exact. And so the market was kind of flooded with Beatles material at this point. And it sort of makes sense when you realize that at this point, Capitol thought that the Beatles were just a fad that was going to go away eventually. They weren't even sure they were going to last the year. They thought it was just a phenomenon like hula hoops or the twist craze. And so they were trying to cash in as quickly as they could on something that they thought was eventually, sooner than later, going to go away. They did not see the Beatles as sticking around. And so that's why you've got a throwaway title like Something New. And the early Capitol album titles read more like hype stickers than actual album titles. You got Meet the Beatles' second album, Something New. They just didn't have any real regard for this album as a piece of legitimate art, as it were. Now, Something New, again, was Capitol taking whatever Beatles material that they had available at the time and throwing it onto an album. So what you have here is you have 8 tracks from the UK A Hard Day's Night album. You've got the remaining 2 tracks, which were on the Long Tall Sally EP, which was released in the UK in the summer of 1964. And you've got kind of an oddity in that it is a German language version of I Want to Hold Your Hand, which was released for the German market. If you know anything about the Beatles, you know they got their start in Hamburg. They were playing clubs in Germany for German audiences, German-speaking audiences. And so as kind of a gesture of appreciation, they recorded She Loves You, which is Solitik, which would not see release in the U.S. until the Rarities album in 1980. And then Come Give Me Deine Hand, which is I Want to Hold Your Hand. They figured they would stick it on here to kind of pad out the album. So you've got I'll Cry Instead from A Hard Day's Night, Things We Said Today, Anytime at All, When I Get Home. Slow Down and Matchbox were both cover songs, and those were available in the UK on the Long Tall Sally EP. Then also from A Hard Day's Night, to round things off, Tell Me Why, And I Love Her, I'm Happy Just to Dance With You, and If I Fell. Now this is I do not have an original rainbow stereo copy of Something New. The most, I guess the earliest copy of this that I have is one on the Apple label, but it is in the shrink, and it's still got the JCPenney sticker on it. Somebody slapped a sticker from a record store on here as well with the barcode, but whatever, it's in the shrink. The jacket is in great shape, and I just dropped my cassette. That's how we do things professionally around here, which I'll get to the cassette later. But this is the mono copy that I do have, which is on the rainbow label. And the cool thing about the mono copy, if you do happen to have one, is that there are 3 versions on here which are different from the stereo counterpart. You've got Anytime at All, which has got a different instrumental bridge. You've got When I Get Home, which has got a different vocal altogether from John. And I'll Cry Instead, which is the extended version that you hear on the UK album. It's not the abbreviated version that was available on the United Artists soundtrack. So it's kind of worth owning the mono copy just for those different versions, if you will, if you're into that kind of thing. So that is the 3 vinyl copies that I have. This is the cassette version where they've cropped the photograph and they put that attractive little orange border there. And of course, the track listing on here is, I believe, a slight variation from, this is a 70s pressing, that cassette. Slight variation, like most of the Capitol cassettes are. The running order of the track list is a bit different. So yeah, there is some duplication from the A Hard Day's Night soundtrack on here. I'll Cry Instead, and I Love Her, I'm Happy Just to Dance with You, and If I Fell were available on that United Artists soundtrack. But since it was a United Artists release, Capitol was not able to release a true Hard Day's Night soundtrack, so they did the best they could without trying to duplicate essentially the United Artists album. So it's sort of interesting because if you think of Capitol somehow got the rights to A Hard Day's Night, like they had the rights to the Help soundtrack, instead of the UK B-side or the UK side 2, they might have thrown some, the way that Capitol was messing with the track listing, they might have thrown the 2 tracks from the Long Tall Sally EP on here. Who knows what this album configuration would have looked like if Capitol had been given the rights to release it as a soundtrack. But nonetheless, it still holds up, I think, as an interesting album. If you don't mind the redundancy with the UK Hard Day's Night album and also the Hard Day's Night soundtrack. So basically, depending on which part of the world you were buying records, you had 2 what were considered basically albums that had material from the movie. In the UK, they had the best of all worlds, basically, because they had the full album as the Beatles intended. This picture was taken from the Ed Sullivan Show when the Beatles appeared back in February of 1964. So there wasn't even any real imagination taken into putting together the cover artwork. You've got some liner notes here, which is basically, hey, we came out with new Beatles product. Go see the movie and you can hear these wonderful songs on the big screen. And aren't the Beatles just the greatest thing since sliced bread? So just a plain album jacket. And then, like most Capitol releases, you've got 3 albums that you can buy. And actually, they've got this, the Beatles songbook, which are instrumental versions, which were recorded by the Hollywood Strings. Because God knows, when people spent all their money on the 5 albums of true Beatles music, they were still hungry for more. So let's throw out there some instrumental, or you could say it was sort of the gateway drug for those, parents who didn't like the Beatles. If you were a teenager, you could buy that record for your parents and say, see, the Beatles aren't so bad, are they? So anyway, that in a nutshell is Something New. And even that title is a misnomer. It wasn't anything new, really. Basically, it was just them, kind of a grab bag of Beatles music circa 1964. So anyway, hope you are enjoying this series. Let me know if you own the album. What do you think of it? And join me for episode 4, where we're going to be talking about the Beatles' story, their first double album. Yeah, the White Album was not the Beatles' first double album. All right, take care.